So what I'm going to do is walk you through the vocal chain I would use on an X32.
Today I'm going to tell you how to get a better sounding vocal live. Many of you have watched my video on the mic mechanic. Today, I'm going to give you tips for how to get really good vocal sounds live directly off the console. I decided to go to Alan Goodwin's studio. He is a master of engineering live sound. We're going to focus on 3 consoles today: the X32, the Wing, and Waves.
So, vocal chains. There are a lot of ways to do this, and especially in the live environment, there are a lot of considerations, more so than just what will sound good, because when we're in the studio, we don't have a PA and an uncontrolled environment where we're having to fight feedback and just trying to get things loud enough on stage and whatever else it is, trying to get things clear in every seat in the room, even at the sacrifice of tone. There's a lot of functional problems, I would say, in a live environment that you're having to fight at the same time as the artistic nature of it. So it's kind of this balance between functionality and art, where in the studio it's pretty much all art. So we use some of the same tools, but sometimes in different ways, and it's important, at least for me, to approach them differently. When I'm in a live environment, I know I'm going to use a compressor differently than I would when I'm in the studio, or I'm going to use EQ totally different, and mic selection. Everything that happens in the process of a vocal chain is different in a live environment. So what I'm going to do is walk you through the vocal chain I would use on an X32, which is what probably everybody has still, which is great. There are obviously limitations, but there are still some hidden secrets that you can kind of work in there to get as good of a vocal sound as possible. And then we're going to look at the Wing, which is, you know, the new and improved X32, which has a good bit more features built on. And then we're finally going to look at some actual plugins that I would use if I had a Waves setup live to run on actually either of these consoles, or pretty much any console. You can run these Waves plugins or third-party plugins depending on the Waves setup, and those are kind of the ideal scenarios. So kind of level 1, 2, and 3, all with hopefully great results. So let's dive in. All right, so we have here an M32 app. It's not controlling an actual M32 right now, but it's the same thing as if one were actually sitting here with us for the purposes of this video. So I have a vocal channel pulled up here, and then I have 3 effects sends actually, just so we can jump to the effects quickly. So first things first, I'll just look at the channel overview here. There's not much you can do in an X32, so it should be pretty easy to follow along. First things first would obviously be gain structure. This says trim. On a preamp, it would actually be a gain knob. That's kind of, that's for every channel, no matter what the source is. But in this case, it's just worth saying, get your preamp right to where your mic level is taken up to line level properly. Get your vocalist to sing as loud as they're going to sing, or close to it, to where it's a healthy level. You don't want it to be too quiet. You also don't want it to be clipping, obviously, but you want it to have a healthy level there so that you're getting as much out of the preamp as you can. So that's always the first step worth mentioning in any microphone for anything ever, but that's worth saying. When it comes to gates, I'll go ahead and say this now. This goes for every console, everything ever. I do not like gates at all. I think they take away any artistic approach pretty much all the time. I occasionally use a gate when it has a very specific functional reason. If there's something that, like a floor tom or a kick drum, that just will not stop feeding back, but it only feeds back after 5 seconds of sitting there unused, then I'll throw a utility gate barely on there to where you can never hear it. It just kind of shaves off from getting feedback on the long term. I would do that on a vocal if really needed, but I find that that's probably not really needed that often. Normally it's another problem that's causing that we need to fix anyway, so I'm not going to reach for a gate hardly ever. I just leave it off. It's there if we need it. Next thing I reach for is, and you see here I have the insert pre the EQ and dynamics. There's a way to do that on this console that I'll show you in a second. So I have an insert first, which is a de-esser. I'll show you that here. Oh, here it is down here. So the de-esser on this console, it takes up an effects slot, which you only have 8 of, but the single instance of this effect is a dual de-esser since they're both mono. So you can basically get 2 channels out of 1. So if you have a ton of vocalists, obviously you run out of de-esser channels. Maybe one's a lead vocal or particularly prone to loud S's or something like that, has a worse microphone or anything. But I try to put it on there when I can. If you only have 2 vocalists, then you're probably in luck. You can use a de-esser. It's really easy. It's got 2 knobs and these yellow gain reduction meters that show you how much it's working. This left knob is more of the sh noise, kind of a lower SH, and this right noise is more of the really high S's. And then you have a male-female button that just changes the point of those a little bit. For those of you that don't know, a de-esser is a compressor for a very limited frequency band. So it basically compresses just the s or sh ranges, because those are typically things that for some reason stick out a little bit more than others, and in a way, again, to reference my earlier conversation, that sound louder in a microphone than they do if you were to stand in front of the vocalist in the room. They wouldn't actually sound that loud when they're just singing to your ear, but through a microphone the S's and SH's could be louder and cause feedback and all these crazy things, be really harsh sounding. So a de-esser just kind of tames that a little bit. Be careful with these knobs, because the higher you go, the more it takes out, the more it reduces, and if you go too high, it can make that person sound like they have a speech impediment, which you don't want. So just be gentle with it. A little bit goes a long way. What I like to do is just do a little bit where it's taken off just a few of these lights, and then turn it on and off with this effects knob here, and just listen to the difference, and you may be surprised that it's actually kind of doing its job just to tame it a little bit. Even if you can't hear it, it's kind of just a feeling thing, and it's barely there, but what it's going to do is help the processing afterwards work a lot better. So that's why I like it before the EQ and compressors, because it just tees them up for better operation. And where you put that pre is if you go to the config tab here or on the console, there's an effects button, and you point it to which effect you want as an insert. This is not a send return, this is an insert. And then there's a pre button. So if you turn it off, it goes after the compressor and EQ. If you turn it pre, it's before that. You cannot put it anywhere else on this console. It's there or there. So it's always after the gate, always after preamp and high pass, obviously. But that's what that is. So, and I meant to mention that since we're going in channel order here, before the de-esser is the, we talked about the preamp, is also the high pass filter, or it's called low cut on this console. I normally start that somewhere around 150 or 180 if it's a singing or talking vocal. Sometimes it needs to go a little higher up into the 200s. Sometimes it's okay and it can go lower. Obviously there is content down here in the 100s that even below, depending on the vocal, that is very rich and warm and good to have. The problem is sometimes it's just too muddy for a full band mix, or a PA that's problematic, or a room that's problematic. So in the studio I definitely wouldn't high pass up to 180 hertz normally, but in a live environment sometimes you just got to clean up that mud, and it kind of just works out because there's a lot else happening hopefully in the band and the music in that range anyway. So I kind of just turn it on and just play around with it to start with, see where we're getting feedback and all that. And that's normally the de-esser and the high pass filter give you a good just starting place for your heavy 2 lifters, which are the compressor and the EQ, which are next. So I like to start with EQ. On this console, it's a pretty basic 4-band parametric EQ. What I'm doing in a live environment is not boosting highs to get clarity. I'm not boosting things to try to get some nice rich sounds out of it. I'm just trying to eliminate problems. When it comes to live EQs, I'm a subtractive through and through EQ guy. I'm trying to find all the problems and get rid of them. So pretty basic EQ will find the problem. If it's there, turn it up, find it, and then eliminate it. Don't eliminate it too much, because then you may really change the sound of the mic, but just eliminate a little bit and turn it on and off, see if that helps. And normally on a vocal mic live, depending on a lot of things, there's a problem up here in the 2 to 4K range, or maybe both of those. I find that 2.5K, all that range, is often the resonant frequency of our ear canals, and often the place where a lot of harshness comes from some PAs. So it's typically an area you can eliminate and get some less harsh vocal sounds. Sometimes a lot of feedback happens around 800 hertz or 1K. Those are typical SM58 feedback places, so that's good to keep in mind. And then sometimes, even though you're low passing or high passing, you still need to clean up some more mud in the 250, 300 range. So often I have like a good bit of low end dumped and it still sounds very rich and warm. It's just kind of taken away those muddy, problematic frequencies, and then I'll often have some high end or high mids tamed, and then sometimes something in the middle that's taming a feedback point of some kind. And again, that's not a cut and dry. Sometimes my EQs look way different than that. That's just a typical thing. In rare cases, you have line arrays that are ultra clear, and you need to change this top one to a high cut or a low pass filter because you have so much feedback in the really, really high stuff here, and if you take it out, it may change the clarity of the vocal a little bit, but it's kind of a give-take. If you fix all your feedback problems and just take a little bit of clarity away, then it's probably good because then you can boost the volume because the feedback is gone and have your clarity from the boosted volume instead of fighting this really high-pitched, just screechingly high problem. So it's kind of counterintuitive. Take a way high end from a vocal, but it is something that is needed sometimes. But I normally don't start there on this console because I have limited bands to work with. So after I have my tone crafted, so we got the de-esser taming things, we got the high pass filter, we got the preamp, we got all that right. We have the EQ taking away feedback, and you notice most of what I discussed with the EQ is all functional. It's all eliminating feedback because that quickly becomes your main goal with a vocal mic. And then finally we have dynamics, the compressor here. So traditionally we use compressors to control the dynamic range of something, meaning we want the difference between the loudest things and the quietest things to be manipulated to where it's a lesser of a difference or a greater difference in certain scenarios, but most of the time we're lowering the difference between the quietest and the loudest things of a source. That way, if somebody sings loud and then quiet and then loud, you don't have to constantly ride the fader and everybody is trying to figure out what they're saying, what they're singing. You can just have it kind of help you out a little bit. And it honestly sounds artistically like most records because we use compressors in the studio as well. So it's kind of a functional and artistic built into one, which is why it's great to use. The one issue with compressors live is that the more you compress, the more you raise your noise floor, because if you think about it, the quieter things are getting louder, louder things are getting quieter, more or less. So that means not only your quiet content is getting louder, your feedback point, your noise floor is getting louder, meaning it feeds back sooner than it would if the compressor were off. So sometimes you can overcompress just from a feedback perspective, but it's worth trying anyway, and I still end up using compressors pretty heavy-handedly in live environments because I'm using my EQ to help with the feedback, those kind of things. I like a quick attack, like 1 millisecond. The 0 can sound weird on this console, so I put it on 1 and 50, which is reminiscent of an 1176 at its best settings for a vocal, in my opinion. It's around 50 milliseconds. What it ends up being, you can't tell on the knob, but if you look in the manual, that's what it is. And it's actually a whole lot faster than 1 millisecond, but again, the 0 sounds weird, so that's our only option here. The hold, sometimes I just turn that all the way down because I don't really like the way it sounds. So it's a pretty quick compressor, meaning it grabs it real quick. There's no transient like a snare drum that I want to let through a little bit to have a pop. It just grabs everything real quick, and then it releases it real quick, so it's just kind of working really efficiently and right in there with a ever-changing vocal level. I like a ratio of 4 pretty much always, 4:1. And then I like the knee to be a little bit softer than 0. That way it doesn't sound as harsh as it would on a snare drum, but not too soft to where it's kind of just gentle. I like it to have a little bit of character and aggression to it normally, depending on the genre and different things and the vocalists themselves. But normally 1 or 2 is where I start with. And then I aim to get a gain reduction of around 6 to 9 at their loudest moments. There's a lot in that. Sometimes you need more because the singer's all over the place, 12, 15. Sometimes you need less because the feedback is just too hard to tame and you have to back it down some. Or they're just a really good vocalist and they don't need much. There are cases like that. So I normally keep a 4:1 ratio, 2 knee, I hit that 6 to 9 gain reduction, so you change the threshold to where you get that gain reduction after you set these other settings. And then I'll start with it at 100% mix so I can hear it, and then I'll try to back it off a little bit just so it sounds a little bit more musical. But it, again, depends on everything. I'm normally not going below 60% and not above 90 or so, somewhere in that range. If it needs to sound more aggressive, turn it up. If it needs to sound more gentle, but still control everything, then you don't have to let up the threshold. You can just let back the mix, and it kind of has a different effect. So all that to say, that's pretty much how I set up a vocal on an X32. The only other thing now is your effects. I like to have, in church music at least, I like to have 3 effects at my reach. I like to have a generic reverb, which I like the hall reverb on this one. And I'll normally put the pre-delay a little higher, 70 or something like that. That's a Chris Lord-Alge trick. Just get it out of the way, let it not muddy up the dry vocal. The decay I'll normally have anywhere in the 2 to 5 second range here. Size I'm normally turning up because that's part of the sound of this genre. And then everything else kind of just depends. There are some secondary controls here on page 2. There's a built-in low cut and high cut that you can use to tame some mud, or you make sure your S's aren't getting through the reverb in a weird way. There's a stereo spread knob. I like to turn that all the way up. And then on your return, you can also EQ, and I wouldn't compress a reverb, but you could if you wanted to. You can at least EQ the reverb if you're finding that feedback is coming just from the reverb. That can be a helpful thing if you're chasing down feedback. Eliminate the effects, mute them, and see if that fixes it. Then you know if your feedback is in your source or in your effect, because it's much better to EQ and really destroy the sound of a reverb to help a feedback than it is the vocal itself. So that's a kind of a good trick to do on that. Second would be delay, and I normally set it at a 1-to-1 tap tempo to where I can tap any subdivisions I want. So if I want a half note delay, I can tap it. Or if I want a dotted eighth note delay or an eighth note, 16th note, whatever I want, I can just tap the exact delay I want. I like a higher feedback, it'd be repeats really, feedback's a misleading term, but higher repeats for this genre just so it has a nice long tail. And I normally make it a little bit darker of a sound of reverb with delay, excuse me, with the EQ that's on this effects return as well. Just again to not have it all bright and too shimmery, but just a good solid delay. And when I use these is sometimes both at the same time, sometimes one, sometimes the other. I'm constantly writing them though live. In addition to the level of the vocal itself, I always got my hand on the reverb and delay, because in a slow song you often want a nice smooth reverb sound that just really fills up the space beautifully, like someone singing in a big hall somewhere. But on a fast song, sometimes a reverb can muddy things up and sound a little bit off character maybe. Not all the time. And so the delay can kind of work better with the speed of a fast song. But then there's times that it's a big moment of a fast or slow song, and you want both in there, and they can really work well together. So I just always I learn the character of both of them and know when it's good to help a vocalist out either way. The third effect I use is an infinite reverb in this case, and I often put it on the room reverb, because on the room reverb you get a longer decay option. It goes up to 29 seconds versus 5 on the hall. I don't know why, because the room is smaller than a hall. That doesn't make any sense. But what I do is put it on like 15 to 20 seconds, a big old pre-delay, 100 milliseconds, all the size you can get, all the diffusion you can get. Just make it sound crazy. Not a lot of high end, not a lot of low end to clear it up. All the spread, maybe some spin on it for modulation, and that's about all. And then what this is going to normally be, and definitely EQ this to make sure there's no feedback. I use this as like my once in a song, sometimes once in a set list, just big moment where the vocalist is holding out the highest, longest, loudest note, and your reverb and delay have already been working, but you need something to just go that extra mile and add to the mess and just hold it out for a much longer time. You got to be careful not to overuse this one and never leave it on just chilling in the background, because it'll mess up your mix, it'll muddy it up. But just pull it up for that special moment and then put it back down, and it'll really take those moments and make them soar. All right, now on a wing, and a lot of the principles I covered will be the same in terms of preamp and how we use a compressor and functionality versus art. I'll just go through how it practically applies on this console, because we do have a few extra tools on this console which are built in. It's an amazing value. You've probably seen the other videos on the Wing, even maybe some of me talking about how great it is, because it's amazing that for $1,700 for the rack version, and not that much more for the full console versions, you can get all of this built in without having to do a Waves system. Waves always makes it much better, but compared to the X32, this is incredible what you get built into it. So here we have a vocal pulled up. Once again, you'd want to set your preamp correct for whatever that mic is. And then on the home tab here, we have a couple interesting things. We have a high-pass filter again, just like the X32 had. This time, though, we also have a low-pass filter, not even part of the EQ. It's just always there, and you can go into filter and change them, which is awesome because I don't have to dedicate an EQ band to it. And so I kind of leave it off, and it's just there if I need to pull that in for feedback purposes. The third thing you have is you have this additional kind of filter type thing. I normally leave all my channels on Sonic Maximizer. Tilt EQ is like a basic like car stereo EQ knob or something like that. It's very easy and quick. It doesn't really do much for me. So, and I'm actually not sure what these are. I need to look into that. I leave it on Maxer because that's the model of a BBE Sonic Stomp or Sonic Maximizer, which what it does is not just a low and high knob, even though that's what it looks like on the EQ here. If it's modeling correctly, what it should do is it actually separates the timing of them just a little bit to help clear up the high end, and it's not something that sounds phasey and weird. It's some kind of crazy scientific experiment that's worked for decades now for guitars or vocals or really anything. You got to be careful with it, but sometimes it's a cool tool to reach for if something's just sounding weird and you can't quite get enough high end or too much high end, whatever it is. Maybe you need some added thickness without changing your EQ that's fixing the feedback points, then this can kind of be a neat way to just add that in a way that hopefully changes the timing in a way that clears it up a bit, gives you some more warmth without getting that feedback all going crazy again. So not something I reach for all the time, but I leave it there just in case. Then we have, so once again we have a gate, which I hardly will ever use, but it's there in case we need it. On this console, we can move around things a lot more instead of just pre-post on the effects insert. We can put pretty much anything anywhere. All you have to do is hit the settings here and kind of move them around. You can even move the gate to the end if you want, unlike the X32. So what I normally do, if you have enough effect slots, I actually like to put 2 inserts on each vocal, which sounds crazy, but we also have 16 effect slots on the Wing, and so it may not be that crazy if you only have 2 vocals or if you just have one that really needs this. So I'm just going to show the ideal scenario, and then if we only had to use one, then if we only had room for one, then that's okay as well. So the first thing I do is a de-esser. It looks very similar to the X32. It's got a low and a high knob, same as before. It's got a male-female knob, and it's got some other things if you have a mid-side setup, which is crazy that it can do that. And I like to put it at the start here after the gate, so it gets it first and contains that first. Then I like to go to my EQ. On the Wing, you don't just have options of this built-in parametric EQ, you can actually change the model of the EQ per channel without taking up an effect slot, which is very cool. But for a vocal, I don't need any of this as my first EQ. I need something very utilitarian so that I can get rid of feedback points. And thankfully I have 6 EQ bands that are not the low and high. So I really have 8 compared to the what would be 5 on the X32. So really a whole lot of options to get really surgical if I need to with this, or just have an extra one. And you can set your L and H bands, which are the 1 and 6 really, as parametric or shelving, just like you can on the X32. That way, if you need a shelf just to cut out a lot of things or add a lot of things, then you can. I start with them on parametric just so I have six bands of parametric easy peaking bands right there. After that, this is the built-in compressor for the channel, but just like the EQ, you can change its model from a standard console compressor to a modeled compressor, which in this case I do want to do because most of these sound way better than the standard utilitarian compressor. So what I reach for easily is a distressor model, which this one sounds pretty good. I'll put it on 4-to-1 again, quick attack time, sometimes 0, sometimes a little off, and release sometimes 1 or 2, depends on the vocal. And then you have your gain reduction knob here, or meter here, again 6-to-9. This one you can actually go a little more heavy-handed on, and it seems to be a little more transparent than most others. That's why the distressor is famous. And yeah, sounds great. And then after that, if we have another effects slot available, I put it on this little conglomerate effects deal they call Vintage. They have several that are multiple effects. So you can go here to, let's see, effects. Oh, here it is, effects type. And we have all these channels. I call it a conglomerate, but same thing here. We have a mastering one, bus, vintage, soul, even. And you see each of them have 3 or 4 effects built into the one thing, which is really neat. And you choose them here, but they're all operating at the same time. So here we have an 1176, which is a lot like a distressor. Sorry, there, a distressor. It's a little more, it has a little more character if you want something that's a little bit more aggressive, or maybe just barely takes off any gain after the distressor, just to add a little bit of kind of rock and roll character. It kind of smashes it in not as transparent of a way, but still transparent compared to some. And so it's good to have there. You could turn it off, turn it on. It's just part of this channel strip, so it's good to have if you need it instead of or in addition to the distressor. Then we have a Pultec EQ, which is it's a model of a tube EQ that just adds a lot of warmth. Even just putting it in probably adds warmth to the sound because it's modeling the transformer and the tubes and whatever else in the circuitry of it. What I like to do on vocals as well is put it up to 16 on the high band here, all the way wide, and just turn it up a little bit. It gives you like a shimmery thing. Now sometimes if you're fighting feedback, that's not a good idea, obviously, but if everything's good and you're using your EQ to fix some things and you just want a little bit more clarity to give it a polished kind of studio sound a little bit without being harsh, then this one will both warm it up and give it kind of a shimmer on the top in a nice way. Just be very careful with it. And then finally, we have another compressor, which is an LA2A, which is the best compressor of all time and forever will be. It's an opto compressor, which works a little bit differently than other types of compressors, FET or Verymu or any of these others. And it's a little bit more musical sounding is what it tends to translate to. And so normally in my ideal vocal scenario, I have 2 to 3 compressors on it, each doing less work than one would do on its own, like on the X32. That way you just get a little bit more interesting of a sound. You get the benefits of all of them, in other words. So maybe if you're using all 3, you'd only want to hit 4 to 6 on the distressor. And then if you're using this one, maybe just 1 to 3, just to get a little bit of a harsh kind of attack smash on it. And then maybe you're using this one for 3 to 5 for some final gentle leveling. And I believe, let's see, oh, maybe you can't mix these down. I thought there was a mix knob for wet and dry. Maybe there's not when it's a conglomerate. Or maybe, oh yeah, there is on the individual one here, like on the distressor. You can do the mix knob up there, but on this one, I don't think there is. So you just know that and be careful with it. Still, it's cool that all this comes built in and you can put all this on one channel strip on a very cheap console. So that's what I would do for a channel in Vocal World on the Wing. And then we have effects very similar to the X32. We have a vocal hall, which sounds almost identical, so I'd set it the same way. It's just got more useful knobs here because you can see the amounts a lot easier. And then we have a delay. This one has some more delay options instead of just stereo delay. It has a tape delay, which I'm much more a fan of for this genre than just stereo delay, because normally it's got, drive knob. You give it some more character. It's normally a little darker, which is good anyway, because you're probably making it darker for feedback. And it's got just some good sounding character to it. It kind of sounds more real, more analog, more musical. So I love this delay. And then we have an infinite verb, once again a room reverb. There may be one that's even better in some of these extra reverbs. I just go with what I know, and it's good. It could be that this delay reverb combo would be cool for the infinite. That way you get some of both for that long, long tail. And the only other thing I would do potentially on this console, and I haven't used it enough to know if it sounds great, but I have it set up as a bus, is a double. So in the studio, to get a wide stereo sound that's not an effect like a delay or a reverb, maybe for the chorus only, or to separate it for some kind of moment, we would double the vocals, even triple the vocals, to where you have the main vocal in the middle, panned, and it's the one you hear mostly, but then you have a very closely recorded duplicate of that lead vocal. Maybe it's a separate take, hopefully, but it's just a slight bit different than the main vocal, and it's panned hard left and hard right, and it's in the background. It kind of just widens out the sound, almost as if you have three people singing the same thing that sound the exact same. Since then, we've modeled this idea of doubling. You would think you could just simply take that one vocal and put an actual delay on it, not a repeating echo, but an actual delay of 20 milliseconds, 50 milliseconds on it. And you can do that. That's called the Haas effect normally. The problem with that is it sounds very sterile because it's just a constant difference. And if you're bouncing to mono in certain in-ear situations or broadcasts, whatever it is, it sounds real phasey and comb filtery. So then in the, I believe it was the 60s, they came out with a machine called an ADT, an automatic double tracker, which not only separates it by a certain number of milliseconds, but it actually constantly varies that separation to where it kind of sounds like a performance because it's constantly varying the difference in it. And it definitely works a lot better for mono bouncing. And not only that, but it also kind of modulates a little bit in pitch as well. So you have a timing and a pitch difference that are kind of always just barely changing. Not enough to be a modulation like a chorus or a flanger, but just enough to be like, oh, something's going on in the background there. And if you make it very wide and stereo, it can just help widen that vocal a little bit, especially for broadcast. Sometimes weird in front of house, sometimes awesome in front of house. So this one, I don't know how great it is, but it is built in and it's got a couple settings here. And so it's worth trying. It may be cool on acoustic guitar. It may be cool on, you name it, other mono source that you want to make a little bit more interesting in the stereo field. Worth mentioning here. And that is the Wing. That's about all I would do on that console. All right, now if I had a Waves SuperRack setup, which for those of you who don't know, Waves SuperRack is the idea of getting studio plugins that we traditionally have only been able to use in the studio because of their high computing power and latency that they cause, getting those plugins in a live environment, which has been done for a while now because computers are getting better, latency is getting shorter and shorter to where we can use some of these incredible plugins in a live environment without slowing anything down really and without noticing the latency much. Even some of these plugins have almost next to nothing in terms of latency. It's really incredible creations. You can now use a Waves setup on virtually any console depending on the setup. On these two consoles you can use it very easily through the USB card built in. If you're not using that USB card for anything else, you can just plug in a computer directly to that USB and use an app called SuperRack Performer, which runs natively on a computer. So make sure your computer's powerful enough, but I think it's $100 software and then whatever plugins you want to put on it. And it actually works with third-party plugins as well. So not just Waves, but Slate and Strymon and anything else that you love, you can put in this software, which basically hosts those plugins to then run through the console. It works on the X32, it works on the Wing, both very well. You can also build a Wave setup that works through Dante or any number of higher capacity audio languages. They're also just more expensive, but they have a lot more capacity. They can work on bigger consoles. You can also get a bigger SuperRack setup that has a separate server instead of running natively on a computer if you need a better higher amount of processing power or something like that. All that's great. It just gets really expensive really quickly. So if you have a laptop that's capable, if you have a Mac sitting around or a PC that's capable, then just get the $100 app, get some plugins for $30 when Waves has a sale every other day, and or if you already have something for a studio studio environment, just use that computer or get your second license over on this computer, and it can be a really cool way to beef up a console. So I'm going to show you that. It won't be in SuperRack because I don't have it on this computer, but it will be in Logic, and it'll be the same plugins I would use in SuperRack. So pretty much the same thing. I love the F6, which is a Waves plugin. It's very cheap and basic, but it's one of the quickest and best EQ / compressors for basically any channel live. I normally load it up on every channel because it's just a quick Swiss Army knife weapon. And not only is it a 6-band fully parametric EQ with a low and high pass filter, just like the Wings EQ. Also, any of these bands, besides the low and high pass filter, can also be in a compressor at the same time, or only. So it's kind of a de-esser at the same time, because you could put a band up here and actually not reduce its EQ at all, but just have it go down, oops, that's EQ, just have it go down in compressor. And you would see, if we had a source going through it, you would see a line drop down every time a frequency in that range activated. And so you can, or you could bring it down and have it activate further that, or you can do it the opposite way, and even if you're going down, you can have it actually go up a little bit every time something activates to try to regain. Maybe you've taken away a feedback point, but it makes it sound real dull. Then you can have it maybe ever so slightly, 2 dB, 3 dB, actually gain something back to help it sound clearer only when they're singing, so that it feeds back hopefully less. An infinite amount of things you can do here. Sometimes it's a lot better to just use the compressor bands of this and have them work for you as a multi-band compressor of sorts, rather than just EQ everything to the extremes. Sometimes that sounds pretty hollow and bad, and sometimes on a Wing EQ or X32 EQ you have no choice. That's the only way to get rid of feedback. But here you can at least be a little more crafty with it and try to find where the actual problem is, and just try if EQ or compressor works better for that problem. So it's really quite a great sounding plugin, and it's really lightweight on the processing power until you turn on the RTA function, but sometimes that's just good to know at the start, so you can see where the frequencies are hitting hard, and then you can turn that off to help the processor. So that's always, I just go ahead and do that up front, because sometimes I end up doing my de-essing in one of these bands. So instead of having the de-esser first, I just put this first. It's just how my brain works when it comes to this plugin, since it's a Swiss Army knife. I do have a de-esser. This is the one that comes with the Slate bundle that's really nice. It sounds really transparent. I like to use it a lot, but the Waves one is also good. They have one called Sibilance, which is a lot probably cheaper and easier to get on the software. This is also a great de-esser, which I'll use live. It's really easy to understand. You just turn it down and it chomps down more on it. Really great de-esser. Put it before the EQ if you like that mode of operation better, whatever works best. There's one plugin that it's an honorable mention. It's probably not ever going to be used by many people live, because to get the low latency version of it, I actually don't even have it. This is the studio version that's very high latency. To get the low latency version, it's very expensive. It's called Soothe, and it is, let's see what it currently costs. It currently costs, see, they don't even put the price up there, $900 for one plugin. The regular version of this plugin is, what was that, $200? Is that what it said? I think it said, there it is, $209. Waves has a version of this plugin that kind of is the same thing, called Silk, but not really. And it, to me, I actually don't really like the way this plugin sounds. It adds some artifacts, and I think to get I think you have to get a low latency version of it as well. Silk Live Waves Silk Vocal, no, maybe not, maybe it's just $35. So it could be that it's worth trying out for you. I just don't personally think it's worth it compared to Soothe. Soothe is so good. But what these do, it's a new genre of plugin called a resonance suppressor. They've been around for a bit, but they're normally so crazy on the processing power that they just haven't been popularized until the last 5 years. But what it does is think of it as a multi-band compressor, kind of like F6, where it's taken out compression, dynamic range of certain frequency bands, but instead of it doing it based off of when things happen in that frequency band, so when volume goes in that frequency band, it just takes it off blindly because, oh, something's happening, take it down. That's the way a compressor works. What this does is it intelligently looks for volume that's resonance only. So if I were to sing a note and then have something that kind of just resonates, or if I play a guitar and wait for that one tone that holds on longer than any others, that's the resonance of it. So it intelligently looks for that tone, so it doesn't take off anything at the start normally. It waits until there's something kind of resonating. And sometimes it's actually pretty quick, but it knows how to find those resonant things at its extreme. If you set this and it was doing its job right, you could strum a guitar and you'd only hear the attacks because it's taking away all resonates of anything you were doing on the guitar. So obviously that'd be a crazy sound, but for a vocal it's really cool because you can keep the tonality of the vocal pure and take away anything that would cause a harshness or a boxiness or a muddiness or a feedback point or really anything that's just undesirable, especially in a live environment. And it's really cool. But again, it's super, super expensive. This is just like ideal scenario. This would be the best plugin you could probably use on a vocal live for pretty much anything. You could honestly maybe just use it and a compressor and probably get an incredible vocal sound because it would handle your de-essing in a certain way. Maybe it may not actually do good on de-essing. Maybe you need a compressor, a de-esser, and this, but it would probably handle every EQ thing you could need if you set it right and if it had enough controls, in my opinion. Anyway, honorable mention, Soothe, it's incredible. Then I like the Slate version of the distressor and the 1176, and here's a colorful EQ that I sometimes throw in there, and another kind of high. This is kind of like the Pultec EQ where it's adding just some high end. We also have a Pultec somewhere in the list here that could do that as well, or you could use the Waves Pultec. There's one. This plugin is great because you just have a bunch of little modules that you can move around, do whatever you want with. I use it all the time in the studio, so it's really, really quick to me to use live. I kind of see it as my artistic portion of the chain. So I've got my functional portion here with the de-esser and the F6, and I try to get everything fixed there. It's like that's the surgery, and then here is my cosmetic portion. I want to get it looking nice. This is the makeup portion. And then there's an LA2A in the Slate bundle, but I like the way the UAD one sounds as well. Sometimes that's hard to get working on Waves, but Waves also has an LA2A that's actually really, really good for the price, especially. Hard to beat. And then that's actually just a studio thing. The only other thing I'll mention live is there's a feedback suppression plugin that Waves makes called X Feedback. And it, of course, is not on this computer, so I'll show it here. It is really great just to have readily available if you need it. I try to not use it if I don't need it because it can change the sound a lot. But what it does is basically you just let a mic sit there on, nobody singing in it, and just ring it out like you would an old analog desk just to find the feedback point. This will find them automatically for you when it's in setup mode, and it can do up to 20 EQ bands that are really, really thin and really, really specific. The idea is if they're that thin, maybe you won't hear them, and it'll just get rid of that one feedback point. And you can actually come in here after the fact and select certain ones or all of them and change them like a regular EQ, up and down, left to right, width, or you can change the global thing. If it just took everything out and looks like the inside of a cave, then you can take them all up or thin them all out a little bit just to back off of the effect while keeping its intelligence in it. Really cool plugin. It's 80 bucks normally. It's pretty much always on sale, but it's really, really good to have. It works for other instruments as well, but vocal, it's kind of an important tool if you need it. It's that tool I don't reach for first, but if I need it, it's always in the truck. Gotta have it. So that's the only other one I would use probably live. When it comes to effects, there's a lot of great reverbs out there. I like the Valhalla reverbs. The vintage verb is awesome. It does pretty much everything I need from a vocal reverb as far as a standard reverb sound. I use a ton of different presets on it and have some of my own that I've crafted. And then of course you can EQ it with any EQ. That's a Logic one. You could put F6 after it though, and have it de-essing your reverb if you want. That's an option. As far as delay, there's a Slate one called Repeater, which is really clean and easy and has a bunch of models. There's also the Strymon L-Cap, which is probably my #1 choice right now. It's a newer plugin and emulates my favorite guitar delay pedal ever, and it's a tape delay, just like the model on the Wing console. Sounds phenomenal, and probably will be the last plugin I ever use for delay in terms of tape. For the infinite reverb, sometimes I'll use a Big Sky, which is a Strymon. It's a little less normal than vintage Verb, but has some normal sounds as well, but definitely has all of your long, huge, crazy, awesome, CCM reverbs. And there's others. There's we also have Baby Audio, the Crystalline, and the Smooth Operator, or the Spaced Out, and I think it's Transit is the delay. A lot of great ones. And we have Sound Toys. They have a really great echo called Echo Boy, and several other modulations, even if you need that kind of thing. A really cool one that you can throw in a reverb channel called Crystallizer if you want like a shimmer octave reverb. It does some interesting things. Then we have Deco, which would be what I would use for ADT. So we talked about doubling a minute ago on the Wing, and it only has the one option. On a Waves setup, you have the Waves one, which is called Abbey Road, where did it go? Real ADT, and then there's a live version of the ADT 2V. And this is basically it's emulating that old console I talked about in the 60s that constantly varies the pitch and the timing of a source to make it sound wide stereo. So to make sure it's panned right and set in a way. It's got some really useful presets actually here that are very minimalistic but sound great. It's probably on sale for 3 cents. But if you want to spend 80 bucks or whatever this one is, then the Strymon Deco beats it even more in my opinion. It's also one of my favorite pedals for guitar, acoustic and electric actually. So it's good to have both of those nearby. Just make sure it's on the wide stereo mode, and that's your doubling. And of course there are many other effects we could talk about, because you have basically free reign to any plugin you could possibly find, and so I'm sure there are many other options that are also great on this. One thing we didn't talk about is auto-tune. Some people want Waves Tune Live on a vocal, so you'd want to do that first, even before your feedback plugin. If you were doing that, it would be Waves Tune Live, X Feedback, F6, and then pretty much everything else is what I would do. That way your tuning's done, then your feedback's done, and then your surgery, and then all your cosmetic. I don't personally like tuning live, but I often have clients ask for it, so it's there on the channels, loaded up, ready to go if we need it, and you can set it to the key of the song, the mode of the song, have presets, snippets that recall, all that stuff. One thing to mention on Waves SuperRack, which we can't see here, is that you can recall preset chains just like you could in a studio software like Logic, or in a recall scope like on a scene recall or a snippet recall on a Wing or X32. You can do that in Waves SuperRack as well. That way if you have, Alan vocal, you can recall that exact chain, or song 1 key and it's in the key of C major, song 2 key, you can recall you can make it change just one parameter of one plugin but on several channels. So if you didn't want it to recall any compressor settings on this vocal, that vocal, any of that, but you want it to change the key on auto-tune for every vocal, then you can do that in a snippet, and it's really, really useful. So SuperRack Performer is definitely a great investment if you have already tried the built-in X32 or Wing plugins and you're wanting to just get some extra functionality, or just try something else. You maybe already have some plugins, you already have a computer sitting around, you just need to spend $100 on the software and get a USB cable and then just get it all routed properly. It can be a really fun way to play around with some of those extra tools, and you'll probably get hooked. So be careful if you do that, because you'll probably never want to unplug it again. That's like me. I love the Wing and what it does naturally, and sometimes I have to use just it. But now that I I know I can do the Waves with just a cable and another computer, I'm bringing it and I'm going to set it up, because we haven't even talked about drums and all the other things we get to do with that kind of stuff, and that gets phenomenal. Waves just released a plugin that does triggering for you at very, very low latency, and I haven't tried it yet, but I have an event this weekend that I plan to load up some of my favorite samples for snare and just try to mix it in there a little bit, because again, there we go, $50. It's called N-Trigger Drum Replacer, and it does what Slate Trigger and what all the others have done for years, just again, much easier to use in a live environment, because it just works. The Waves plugins work really well in SuperRack. They don't pop up in a separate window. You can choose any parameter on any plugin, and it gives you this massive fader on the whole side of the screen to get really fine-tuned adjustments. If you have a touch screen or just a problem with your mouse, it can get really specific with that. And so it's a really, really great piece of software. Let me just make sure here. SuperRack Performer. Yeah, here it is. And yeah, $100. And it does all of the third-party plugins. You really cannot beat this, because to get third-party plugins on a non-native SuperRack setup, so the SuperRack setup with a server, to get third-party plugins, I believe, at least it was this way a few months ago, you have to buy the really expensive server, which is $8,000-$9,000. You can't do it in the middle tiers, which are $1,000-$2,000, what most people buy. So you can either do it on the cheapest of the cheap or the most expensive. So it's kind of a hidden gem. I know you're spending more in your computing power, so buy a $3,000 computer and $100 software, but even that, to me, is still better than buying a $9,000 server if you have all these third-party plugins you're wanting to use. So it's a great piece of software. They're really great with tech support. It's gotten really efficient. Our buddy Zach Coates actually started a Facebook group or page on SuperRack Performer specifically, because he saw me using it and we talked about it and we're like, well, this is amazing. And there's not that much of a community talking about it yet. And so even though it's been out for a little while, it's just now catching on. And so anyway, it's a really great thing to try out if you got an extra $100.
Thanks again for watching. Check out the links below. If you have more questions for Alan, please drop them in the comments. Can't wait to see you on the next video.